Hello and welcome back to this video. Today I'm doing my 25.7 ADC tier list. So if you enjoy content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were no direct changes towards the ADC role this patch, so let's get into it. The D tier is going to consist of the same two champions. In the case of Mel, she is just strictly underpowered at the moment. Riot said they were waiting to see where she landed to kind of better judge how much of a buff she needs, and they've swung quite hard in 25.8. Obviously, this is 25.7. She still is underperforming. The buffs are going to give her some level of trading power, and that should definitely help her in this role. I imagine she will jump maybe up to the B tier, but we'll have to wait and see. Right now, though, a pick I would not really recommend. In the case of Kalista, she is incredibly elite skewed at the moment. If you are incredibly good at piloting this champion, she is still one of the best marksmen in the game. It's why she still sees a lot of competitive play at the moment, just because of how powerful she can be. The main things to just be aware of this champion is she does perform a lot better in those environments, being able to be paired with picks which can kind of utilize her passive more effectively and work nicely with her ultimate are very core to what she wants. And the changes she received not too long ago ended up being really elite skewed. She, as a champion, is just a pick which requires a lot of time to really perform on. And if you haven't sunk that time in, or you're not willing to sink that time in, she's a pick I would recommend avoiding. She's not exactly popular, so you don't really need to ban her. And yeah, that's kind of where she stands at the moment. In the C tier, we lead off with Samira, who I'm actually going to move towards the higher end of the C tier. She got buffed not too long ago, and the buff didn't do a huge amount. It did help her. It was nice, allowed her to siege and combo a bit better, going from 3 seconds to 5 seconds on the E duration attack speed. Still needs a bit more, I think, to really like find herself back in the meta, but for the moment, she sits as like a high C tier champion. If you perform really well on Samira, she can still be a really good marksman. She just requires a lot of time to really sink into at the moment and get good results on. In the case of Draven, he's also an incredibly elite skewed ADC. It's the case with some of these lower tier marksmen, but not picks I would really recommend for more average elos. But if you are an elite, they can still be some of the best performing options, and Draven is kind of like that. He sits as a high to low C tier option at the moment. Kind of differs depending on just how well you perform with a champion, but he can really like compete quite comfortably with some of the best marksmen in the game if you have the confidence and the practice on the champion. In the case of Brand, he's just a weak champion at the moment, and I was presuming they were going to just strictly do a buff to him across all roles going into 25.8. They have opted to just a jungle buff, which is unfortunate because I think Brand could probably do with some more help across his like more mained roles. Jungle obviously ends up being the role he's kind of been shoehorned into. Unfortunate, but it's nice to have some level of variety. Brand, however, though, at the moment is kind of gated by the fact that he can only really be paired with Nami, and even then, he's a pick I wouldn't really recommend. You're not going to get that consistency, and he probably sits as more like a low to mid C-tier option. He's the kind of like benefits of playing Brand are the fact that he's easy to play, and he works a lot better in low to mid MMRs, where obviously scaling is rewarded, and people won't play around his kit as effectively. Case of Ezreal, he's also a pretty elite skewed marksman. I say a pretty like very elite skewed marksman. You want to put a lot of time into this champion to really get the most out of it. If you have a good knowledge of just League in general and you are consistently rotating skill shots and like playing this pick really like effectively, he can still be one of the best marksmen in the game. Right now though, for average play, he's definitely fallen a bit down with like direct nerfs towards him. He sits as more like a C tier option at the moment. Felios has always been kind of close to the meta, but never quite in it. Kind of akin to like Samira, if anything. Both these champions have been a slightly on the weaker side, kind of intentionally because they have really big mastery curves. If you put a lot of time into them, they can be pretty effective picks. I think Aphelios is getting really close to that and definitely deserves a spot like in the high end of the C tier. Once again, though, put a lot of time into him, you'll be rewarded. If you're not willing to, don't play Aphelios. He's just not a pick which really performs with a limited amount of games on him. Kaiser is definitely on the rise at the moment. Obviously, we've seen, once again, loads of build variants. We've seen, like, Yuntau's variants. We've seen Umbral variants with the buffs to it this patch. If you want to play Standard, I'd recommend just trying the Kraken and Static variants into Ginsu Nasha. That build tends to perform really well, and with the buffs she received not too long ago, definitely deserving of a high C-tier spot. She is probably she is just outright one of the most played marksmen in the game. Can be really effective if you are very comfortable on her. A pick which does require a good amount of games to be like effective on node. Like you can't just play Kaiser at a like relatively surface level and expect to win. You do need to play the kit well to really get full value out of the champion. Lux is here kind of as just like a mage option. Not a pick I'd really recommend, but if you're auto-filled, then you can play Lux bot and get good results. Obviously, you want to avoid pairings with, like, enchanters. She tends to not be as effective with those. If you pair her with heavy CC support, you can consistently land your combos. And Lux does a lot of damage. She has great wave clear and definitely has the tools to work quite nicely in this role. Dropping down from the beta to the C tier is Zeri. I kind of overrated Zeri back when she and Yuntao's got buffed pretty, like, close to each other. She's being buffed again in 25.8. I think that is a preemptive buff to Yuumi being nerfed, though, as they are quite commonly paired with each other. Zeri is fine. If you're comfortable on her, she can definitely be a solid marksman, but probably sits a bit lower than some of the other options at the moment. Xayah is a good counter pick option. Not a pick I really recommend, but if you're very comfortable on her and you can play her in certain spots where enemy has a lot of dives, she can be quite an effective marksman to bring out. Wei is being buffed in 25.8, and it is a sizable buff. They slightly over-nerfed him in the previous set of nerfs, and I think they've noticed that. They've kind of gone back on that and given him some more passive damage. And I believe they've done one other direct change to him. I think it's his ultimate's getting a bit of damage, and then it's nice. I think Wei will once again find himself as a good solid A tier mage in the bot lane. So if you want to put some practice in, now is a good time. If you're not really want to put the practice in, he's like a solid B tier option still, a relatively solid mage to whip out in the bot lane every so often. I am going to drop Victor down to the B tier. I still think the pick is a solid bot lane option. He's obviously just lost a lot of his popularity. He kind of, well, I mean, he spiked with his ASU back when Arcane 2 came out, but has kind of declined since then. He will probably drop out of the bot lane tier list after a certain point, as he's just not really played enough here to kind of suggest him as a pick when the sample size is so low. But if you are comfortable on him, he can still be, once again, kind of like Lux, a good flex option to the bot lane. Ziggs and Veigar are some of the more traditional bot lane mage options you've seen. In the case of Ziggs, his most played role is bot lane, and it's kind of left him in a pretty neglected state for mid lane. He's an okay AP option here. I don't think he's one of the best ones at the moment, but if you are very comfortable on him, he's fine. The main problem of Ziggs, it's just Ludens isn't a great item at the moment, and he's definitely suffered from that. Veigar's had a lot of work done on him to really push him out of the bot lane, and he's still a solid option here. He scales really well, and is definitely going to perform better in the lower MMRs. Not a pick I'd really recommend learning, but if you can play him, then he can be a fine option here. Case of Lucian, he got buffed and in 25.6, and he really benefited from that. He, as a champion, has definitely had times where he's been kind of gatekept by competitive, but right now he seems to be in a pretty balanced spot just across the board. He does see some level of competitive games when people go deep into Fearless, being paired with primarily the Nami once again, but as a standalone, I think he's a solid option. He has more than just the Nami pairing these days, and can definitely work as a solid B tier option. Case of Smolder, the changes he received in 25.6 really helped him. He obviously had the Q change with IE not too long ago as well, which incentivized him to move towards those builds, and I would say he's found himself as a pretty solid bot lane option as well. Varus is the premier blind pick marksman at the moment. He's been in competitive for so long, and it's kind of frustrating because I think he could definitely be better for, like, and just in general, put in a better and more healthy spot for both competitive and solo queue. He's pretty frustrating to play against. He's obviously had iterations of builds where Lethality's been really good, Lethality's been quite bad, but right now, Lethality's good. Like, you can play Lethality Varus, find good amounts of results, and on-hit Varus is still a relatively decent way to go. I think both builds require, like, situations to play them in, and I think for solo queue he definitely isn't quite as consistent, especially for Lethality build. It has its issues with players not really playing around it as effectively, which is why on-hit traditionally performs better in, like, your lower MMRs. But if you play Varus, I think the champion still very good, still very blindable, and sits as a very solid B tier option. Corki has definitely gone down in prio quite substantially ever since his direct nerfs. He's kind of been, like, on the downwards for a while, though. This pick is still incredibly oppressive early onto the game, and his wave clear combined with that early game strength has definitely made him more of an elite skewed pick. The benefit of that, though, is he's easy to play. He's kind of like Kalista, but if you can play him at a very surface level, it's fine. I think Corki is a really healthy pick to learn. I'd definitely recommend him if you're looking for an early game skewed marksman who's a bit easier to pick up than like your Callistas and your Dravens, for example. Dropping down from the A tier to the B tier is Sivir. Sivir just hasn't really been performing at an A tier level for a while now. Kind of moved her up back along when she was doing a bit better. They like changed her Q from bonus to total AD ratio, I believe it was, and Yuntau's was kind of on the rise on her. Since then, other champions have kind of picked it up, perform a bit better than her. She's still a fine option and can be really good as like a counter pick, but not quite the A tier level I kind of had her at in the previous patch. Moving on to the A tier, then we lead off with Karthus, who is doing pretty well just across the board in mid, bot lane, jungle. He's a very hard mage to play, but if you play him well, he can output some of the most damage in the game. His ultimate's an incredibly powerful ability, and yeah, give this guy gold, he will print damage. Definitely a pick which I'd recommend learning if you want to. He's not for everyone though. Like, you're probably not going to play Karthus, and that's fine. Like, it's for the niche of the audience, I guess. In the case of Swain, he's a bit more like deeply played than Karthus. Not substantially, like they're still unpopular champions, but he can be played in very good spots. Swain as a champion wants to play into short range, healthy compositions which don't do a huge amount of damage, so he can like use his ultimate and maintain uptime on it for a long while, stacking like with his E. It does give him a clear win condition and like draft condition, but he can be one of the best champions in the game for those scenarios. Yeah, very deserving of an A tier spot at the moment. Twitch and Vayne are some of your solo queue options. In the case of Twitch, obviously pairs quite nicely with some of the enchanters, but can pair well with Engage, and if you pilot the champion well, he can be very solid at the moment. Obviously, he's played pretty nichely and like as an OTP option, but still very solid in solo queue. Same goes for Vayne. Tends to perform better in lower MMRs, kind of like Twitch, where people don't really like play around their weaknesses. In the case of Twitch, oftentimes like the invisibility and like vision control, and in the case of Vayne, her limited amount of wave clear and like her weaker early because of that, not being able to shove waves and roam around the map does make her weaker in elite MMRs, where people will punish that to an extent. Case of Ashe, she's just a solid utility option, does good damage, not quite the like carry Ashe we've like. I mean, she can still carry games, obviously. Ashe and like most marksmen will be able to, if you give them enough gold, do a huge amount of damage, but obviously has more of a utility-centric kit, and that definitely prohibits her from being as recommendable as some direct carries if you're looking for lots of agency, but she's still a very good pick. Caitlyn sits towards the middle, low end of the A tier. She got directly nerfed in the previous patch, and she lost a bit from it, but not a huge amount. She's still a fine A tier option. If you are comfortable playing Caitlyn, then yeah, she can output a huge amount of damage early onto the game. Does tend to drop a bit mid-game, but then spikes really hard on like 3-4 crit items, where you can go back to kind of one-shotting targets. Well, I say go back to. You go from being a lane bully to one-shotting targets later onto the game with like trap, net combos, and yeah, she's still a solid A tier option in her current state. Towards the high end of the A tier, the likes of Seraphine performing really well. The buffs she received to her Q not too long ago really helped her, and she's definitely a deserving A tier champion at the moment. More of a jack of all trades, good utility, good like heal and shields, good good damage at the moment, and deserving of a high A tier spot. The final champion in the A tier is Jhin, and he's quite close to the S tier. The buffs he received in 25.6 helped his scaling substantially. Jhin does quite well early onto the game, where he can oftentimes get control and shove waves, but then drops a bit mid-game, kind of like Caitlyn, and then spikes back up later onto the game, where he has a lot of movement speed and a lot of damage within his kit, and can be a really effective late-game option. Moving up to the S tier is Tristana. She's come so far. She's gone all the way from like the D tier to the S tier within like the last 5 to 10 patches, something like that. And yeah, she's performing really well at the moment. Riot have caught on. They're nerfing her in 25.8. But overall, the shift in builds, the kind of relearning of the champion, which a lot of people have gone through, has solidified her as a very solid S tier option at the moment. She's losing some ult damage combined with something else, maybe armor growth. I can't remember off the top of my head, but she's going to be losing some power. But she's definitely doing quite well at the moment, and very very much a pick you should probably play in her current state. Maybe you don't want to learn her because of the nerfs, which are occurring, which is fine. There are 5 of the champions I have here. In the case of the 2 niche ones, I mean 3 niche ones, I guess, but Kog'Maw and Nyla are very solid S tier options. Kog'Maw's conditional for the most part, and so is Nyla to an extent. They want to be paired with specific things to really get full value out of their kit. Nyla might just be the best marksman in the game. If more people played her, they'll probably catch on and have to nerf her quite heavily, but because no one really plays Nyla, she kind of is just allowed to sit in her current state. Obviously, there is some bias there. She's played primarily by OTPs. She's also played primarily in certain pairings where she's going to get more value, but I wouldn't sleep on Nyla. I think this pick is really good, and if you enjoy her, she's definitely a champion you should be playing at the moment. In the case of Yasuo, he's also incredibly strong in his current state. If he was slightly stronger, if he was slightly more popular in the ADC role, he would probably have to be directly nerfed to his ADC strength, but he isn't quite there yet at the moment. He's very good into a lot of the ADC pool, and just in fact, like range options, Yasuo really shines as a champion. If you can get like your Bork, Shieldbow, IE Spike, he is one of the strongest champions in the game, and his early is also really strong. He can curve really nicely into this, and I think as a pick, you should probably learn a melee option in the ADC role, and if you're maybe not wanting to learn something like a Nyla, which I mean is like kind of fake melee, I guess you could say. And Yasuo is an incredibly good option for that. MF and Jinx wrap up the S tier. There's no S plus ADC at the moment, which is why I'm pretty sure Riot haven't directly nerfed anything going into this patch. But MF and Jinx have been nerfed going into this patch. Well, they were nerfed in 25.6, I believe. Or Jinx was nerfed in 25.6, and MF was nerfed in 25.5. Can't remember specifically. They might have been like buff nerfed on the same patch. But yeah, MF, really solid option. Does a huge amount of damage. Acts really nicely as like a caster, marksman. And in the case of Jinx, she's a great hyper carry. Give her a lot of gold. Give her early kills. She's very good. I recommend learning Jinx. I recommend learning MF if you're looking for like really solid options. Tristana obviously has been on the rise for a while, and Yasuo as like a melee option can be really good. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.